The mountains promise. There's something special about watching the sunset paint the mountainside. Tonight, I want to share a story about a valley where God's handiwork spoke to generations through a remarkable face carved by nature itself into the mountain stone. In the shadow of towering peaks, where faith and nature intertwined, lived a young boy named Ernest and his mother. Each evening, they would sit at their cottage door, gazing up at what the valley folk called the Great Stone Face, a perfect image of human features that nature had sculpted into the mountainside. "Mother," said Ernest thoughtfully, "when I look at that face, it feels like it's watching over us with such kindness. If I ever met someone with a face like that, I just know they'd have a heart full of love." She smiled gently. "There's an old prophecy about that very thing. Would you like to hear it?" "Oh, yes, please," he said excitedly. "Long ago." His mother began softly, "Before our grandparents' time, it was said that someday someone would be born in our valley whose face would match the noble features on the mountain. This person would be the wisest, kindest soul of their time, a true reflection of God's love." Little Ernest's eyes grew wide with wonder. Living in the valley, everyone knew the Great Stone Face. Some dwelt in humble log cabins nestled in the forests, others in farmhouses on gentle slopes, and still others in bustling villages where mountain streams powered the mills. But rich or poor, everyone shared something special. They could look up and see those noble features watching over them with gentle wisdom. As Ernest grew, he never forgot the prophecy. Each evening, after his daily chores, he would pause to look up at the face. Sometimes, when the sunlight caught it just right, he could swear it smiled at him, as if sharing some beautiful secret. One day, exciting news spread through the valley like wildfire. A man named Gathergold, who had left the valley as a poor young man, was returning home as one of the richest merchants in the world. People whispered excitedly that surely this must be the one from the prophecy. Could it be? Ernest wondered aloud, hopefully. Could God's plan be unfolding before our eyes? When Mr. Gathergold arrived, he continued softly, his gleaming marble mansion seemed to outshine the sun itself. But when Ernest saw him, this man whose touch turned everything to gold, something felt missing. Where the mountain's face showed kindness, Mr. Gathergold's showed only calculation. Where one reflected warmth, the other reflected only wealth. That night, as Ernest looked up at his old friend on the mountain, the dying sunlight seemed to whisper, "Be patient, dear one. True worth isn't measured in gold, but in love." Years passed, like pages turning in God's great book. Ernest grew from a thoughtful boy into a hard-working young man. Though he lived simply, working the soil with his hands, his heart grew rich with wisdom. Each evening, without fail, he would look up at the Great Stone Face, finding new lessons in its timeless expression. Then came the day when another famous son of the valley returned, Old Blood and Thunder, a great military commander. Surely, people said, this hero must be the one. His face had been carved by courage and victory. But when Ernest saw him, he said gently, he recognized that strength alone isn't what makes a person truly great. The general's face showed power, yes, but lacked the deep compassion that made the Great Stone Face so remarkable. What Ernest was learning, though he didn't realize it yet, was that true greatness isn't found in wealth or power. Each disappointment was actually a gentle reminder from above that God's plan unfolds in His own perfect time, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in what we seek, but in who we become while seeking. As seasons turned like gentle pages of time, another figure emerged who many thought might fulfill the prophecy, a gifted statesman they called Old Stony Phiz. His words could move mountains, they said, and his voice echoed through the halls of power. The day he visited, the valley burst with celebration. Banners waved, music played, and hope filled every heart. Ernest, always faithful, stood among the crowd, watching and wondering. "Look," the people cried excitedly, "surely this is the one. See how his face matches our mountain," he said with gentle understanding. But when Ernest saw him, his heart knew the truth. The statesman's face held power and pride, but lacked the serene compassion that made the great stone face so beloved. It was another gentle lesson from above, that eloquent words without a loving heart behind them are like clouds without rain. Meanwhile, something beautiful was happening that nobody quite noticed. Ernest, now with silver threading his hair, had become a source of wisdom in the valley. After his daily work, he would share stories and insights with his neighbors. His words weren't crafted to impress. They flowed naturally from a heart filled with love and understanding. People started coming from far and wide just to listen to him speak. Scholars and city folk would sit beside farmers and children, all drawing comfort from his gentle wisdom. Yet Ernest remained humble, always looking to the mountain face for inspiration, never realizing what others were beginning to see. Then one evening, a poet visited the valley. This wasn't just any poet. His words had touched hearts across the nation, revealing God's beauty in the simplest things. He had come seeking Ernest, drawn by stories of his wisdom. "Can you spare a bed for a traveler?" the poet asked at Ernest's door. "Willingly," Ernest replied warmly. "The great stone face itself seems to smile more kindly at your arrival." As they sat together, sharing thoughts like old friends, something extraordinary happened. The poet, who had spent his life capturing beauty in words, saw what everyone else had slowly been realizing. In the gentle wisdom of Ernest's weathered face, in the kindness of his eyes, in the peaceful strength of his expression, there it was, the very image they had all been seeking. Tears filled the poet's eyes as understanding dawned. He watched Ernest speaking to the gathered villagers, sharing wisdom that came not from books, but from a lifetime of faithful devotion. "Look," the poet suddenly called out, his voice trembling with joy. "Behold, Ernest himself is the living image of the great stone face." The people gathered there fell silent, their eyes moving from the mountain to Ernest and back again. Like a sunrise breaking through clouds, they saw it too, the same noble brow, the same gentle strength, the same loving kindness that had watched over their valley for generations. But Ernest, he continued warmly, true to his humble heart, simply smiled and shook his head. Even then, he believed that somewhere, someone worthier would appear. You see, he had spent so many years looking upward in hope and wonder that he never realized how the greatest change was happening within himself. What Ernest had discovered, though he didn't know it, was one of God's most beautiful mysteries, that we slowly become what we most deeply admire. While others sought greatness in wealth, power, and fame, Ernest had simply loved goodness itself. Day by day, year by year, that love had carved his heart and face into something beautiful. The prophecy had been fulfilled. not in a single moment of revelation, but in the patient work of time and grace. Ernest's transformation hadn't come from striving to be great, but from humbly seeking good. Even now, if you visit that valley as the sun sets, you might see someone sitting quietly, gazing up at the great stone face, and if you look carefully, you might notice something wonderful. How their own face seems to glow with a touch of that same divine light that Ernest discovered, because that's how God often works his greatest miracles. Not in sudden flashes of glory, but in the patient transformation of hearts that look to him day after day, year after year, until his own image shines through them. Good night, dear friends. May you rest peacefully, knowing that God is still at work, carefully sculpting beautiful things in those who faithfully seek him.